Hi everyone, in this tutorial I'm going to show you how to paint whiskers in acrylics. Now the tips and techniques that I share here can be applied for painting any long fine lines. Now the first thing here is it's really important to get the consistency of the paint versus water. So the fine lines that I'm painting now are only possible because I don't have much paint on my brush. Now as I start to continue with painting in more of the whiskers, I will start to hint at more of a thicker whisker, and there I've applied more paint to my brush. Now it's very important that I want to be making sure that I'm getting a natural variety. Not all of the whiskers are going to be the same width, some are going to be narrow, others are going to be thicker. They're curving in different directions and they're also varying in length. Having this variation is going to really help build up more of that natural look to the painting. Now the brushes that are best used for details like this are liner or rigger brushes. They have the longer bristles, they're able to hold a little bit more paint, so therefore you're able to get more of that longer continuous line. Now the whiskers on this horse are not actually that long, but if you are painting long whiskers, maybe a cat for example, you want to make sure that you've got a little bit more paint and water loaded onto your brush. So practicing getting that mixture just right, depending on how long that brush stroke needs to be, will make a real difference to how realistic, how long, how fine those details are. So when you're mixing the paint to get these whiskers, you do want to add water, but you don't want to add so much water that you end up with a mixture that's as thin as a glaze. You do need to therefore have enough of that paint in that mixture to still make those lines look opaque. Now opaque means that you can't see through them. If you add too much water, they're going to be transparent and you'll end up seeing the colours of the animal, your background, whatever it may be, through that brush stroke. Now one of my biggest tips when painting whiskers like this is take your time. I haven't sped any of this footage up, this is all in real time and you can see how steady I am moving that brush. I'm not trying to rush through because I find that when you do that you have more of a tendency to put more pressure on that brush and then you're going to end up creating thicker lines, which for these whiskers, how fine they are, you want to avoid that. Now the other thing is they're not all white, so I started off on the left hand side with much more of a lighter mixture, but as I've come down to the lower part of the chin I've added a little bit more of a brown and warmer colour to it to help tone that down. Not all whiskers are going to be bright white, so it's really important to study that reference photo. Now something else that can be very easily done is we try to count the whiskers in the reference photo and try to paint in every single one of those in our painting. That there I find personally is not important. As long as I've got about the right number of the whiskers and they're curving naturally, I've got the right length of those whiskers, that's enough for my painting. I don't feel like I need to count them and replicate it as accurately as that. And the only reason for that is if the animal was to turn its head slightly, the whiskers are going to look different. You're not going to see as many of those, you might end up maybe seeing more. So as long as I've got it close, for me, that's more than enough. Now at times here I do dab with my finger and all I'm doing there is just lifting a little bit of that paint off the surface so that I can make that whisker appear a little bit more of a darker value. The other thing as well is here I'm taking a damp brush with just a very small amount of water on, and if I make a mistake, that whisker there attached a little bit too closer to the inside of the nostril, I can simply use a damp brush and use it like an eraser. As long as the layers of paint underneath are completely dry, and that layer of detail, that layer of paint that you don't like is wet, you can take that damp brush and remove that entirely from your painting. It's a really nice way of working because it takes that pressure off. We don't have to get every detail right. It's something that just allows us a little bit of breathing space. If we create a brushstroke that is incorrect, we can remove it and start again. Now for me personally, when I paint whiskers like this, or if it is a particularly long fine line, getting that balance of paint versus water is really important. And I know I've mentioned this at the beginning of the video, but these whiskers would not look as fine as this if I had more paint in that mixture. And again, if I had too much water, this here would potentially run. You might also get a little bit of that paint almost look like it beads up at the end of your brushstroke. If that happens, that's another indication that your mixture is too thin. You want to go back in and add a little bit more paint. Now another big tip when painting whiskers of any animal, it's really important not to get carried away and add too many. I say this because I find painting whiskers one of the main elements that takes that art to the next level. It's that detail that really does finish off the painting. So I want to be making sure that I'm always taking a step back from my easel and having a look at a distance. If I feel like I need to add a couple more, then I'll do that and then I'll reevaluate it. But it's always worthwhile, and it's much easier to look at that at intervals rather than get carried away, add too many, and then the paint's dried and then we're going to have to try to paint over them. Because as I said earlier, we can only use a damp brush to remove those whiskers if there is still wet. If we then decide after a couple of minutes that we've added too many, we're going to have a much harder time covering that up. And some animals have more whiskers than others. This horse actually had quite a lot, so I did have to use far more than I would on something else. But it's just obviously very unique to each animal. Now at this stage here, what I'm doing is using a little bit more precision, using a lighter mixture, and in some cases actually painting over some of my existing whiskers to lighten them up. Now if this is something that you find challenging, I would recommend just to use a normal bit of watercolour paper just with some black paint, and you can then create some of your initial fine lines, then take some white paint and then paint over those existing lines, just to get a little bit of practice there at painting over your fine lines, because it does take that little bit of extra technique and precision. And you don't necessarily get it right first time. You saw there that I actually at the end of that whisker created 2 individual lines, but because that background is dry, I was able to take my damp brush and remove that and tidy it up completely. It's a great way of fixing those little mistakes. So I do hope these few tips on how to paint whiskers and fine lines have been useful. If it was, I would really appreciate it if you could give the video a like and a thumbs up, because it makes a huge difference to my channel. I'd be very, very grateful. I also upload a couple of videos to YouTube every week, so if you would like to get notified of that content, then don't forget to hit the subscribe and the bell button. If you would like to paint along to the full-length horse tutorial that I have available on my Patreon channel, then I'll link my Patreon in the description below. If you've got any art-related questions, feel free to pop them in the comments, because I'm more than happy to help if I can. And I'm going to be uploading another video next week. But as always, thank you so much for watching.